Hi, good evening. Oh yeah, did I hang up on the other? I think we're done on the other one, right?
There we go. Get my get my speaker on.
Yes, that you can find on Apple and on Google, and it's a phenomenal. I think they've got like 200 episodes already. I was looking at the different episodes yesterday. There's like 200 episodes. So if you have nothing going on this weekend, just go down and download the post. You can download like 200 hours over of content. That's really phenomenal.
That's a lot of hours.
That's a lot
I
of
wouldn't
hours.
do it. I wouldn't do it. Just listen in on whatever it is you like on the Soul Fan podcast. It's interesting stuff right now, completely relevant. And if you have a sense of spirituality, consciousness, or anything weird, it's a fun podcast. And you're on it.
Yeah,
JP's on
yeah.
it also.
I am
He's
on it twice.
twice. Yes, he has twice been our guest and super interesting just to talk about his own background in neurodivergence and some other areas that we ventured into. So it's all a part of the journey.
So, I've always dreamed, that's been one of my goals since I became a therapist, that I would one day have a radio show and help people and answer questions because I know a lot of people don't have means to actually, go to the therapist or they don't have the money because it's expensive in the US. And unfortunately, a lot of insurance company won't cover mental health. Some insurance will, but a lot of them will not. And then it's an arm and a leg to go see a therapist can get pretty expensive. And I thought I should create a show where people can call in and I'm sure today we're not going to have anybody calling in, but in the future it'd be nice to have people call in and ask questions. And I'll respect your anonymity, and you can be on camera or you just can be audio. But the idea is that somebody asks a question, and then I try to give them as much knowledge as I do have, and I try to pass on, my years of experience as well as maybe help, guide someone, even if it's for a short time while we're on the air. So that's the point of the podcast. That's what I want to do. And I feel that right now, more than ever, there's a need for mental health access. I mean, few weeks back, we talked about the United Healthcare CEO shootout in the middle of the street, and the gentleman who went up to Luigi Mangione, and how he went and he gunned down the CEO. And we could talk about Luigi Mangione, but it's not Luigi Mangione I want to talk about. It's the people in America, the people that went online and were cheering on the guy killing another guy. I mean, like Brian Thompson, the CEO, what he did is a CEO of a company, and I think to be a CEO of any company anywhere in the world, you've got to be business minded. And the business model is there's not a whole lot of humanity. You got to make money, you got to show, you know, growth. But I think there's a tendency sometimes for people to do things that are quote unquote legal, that are not always moral. And so I think Luigi Mangione wanted to convey a message, and I think the way for him to convey the message was to just kill somebody so that everybody would pay attention to what he had to say. But I think that clearly Luigi Mangione has a need for help. You don't kill people just because you want to make a point. And then there was like something like 44,000 people went online within an hour and gave him a thumbs up and was like, yeah, cheering on the death of someone. And that tells me that the value of human life in America, we condone that killing, and we uh, we justify it. And I thought people are upset. A lot of people are upset with the insurance companies, and a lot of people are grieving, maybe the loss of a relative, maybe that was denied care, or. And I feel like people want a sense of justice, but I think that sometimes we're so far removed from what's going on. We're like so far removed from the actions. Like when we hear somebody's getting killed on the news, we understand it, but we don't process it. And so, yes,
You mean like we're completely desensitized to it?
absolutely.
Right. It's very easy to text or to respond on a social media platform in some way. I'm sure if those people are sitting next to his family or next to him as he's dying and taking his last breath, or the killer himself, that reality of all that may be very different. The feeling of all that may be very different. It's very easy to look at something on television or on a social media platform and respond without any feeling of it. Sort of deprograms our sense of humanity. And here we are on a social platform ourselves right now, but I hope that's not the case, but that might be the case.
Well, like even watching television, there's a lot of programming that I watch, I put on TV, and then sometimes I have to shut it down because it's so violent, it
Mm-hmm.
bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
And my spouse would be like, "Why are you turning the TV off?" And I'm like, "Because it really bothers me, right?" And I guess that the fact that we find it okay. Like, first of all, like scenes are more and more gory. The violence is more and more intense.
Mm-hmm.
With the special effects, it's more and more real. And we are getting used to watching things that are, you know, I watched a mini series last week. I watched it was a 3-part show that was made in England. It was an Agatha Christie adaptation, and one person got axed. Somebody hit him with an axe in the show. It was really bloody, and I could barely look at the screen. It was really upsetting. And I'm thinking that some people will eat a full meal while watching something like that. Will not even be fazed by it, and it's just so upsetting. And that's why I think that a lot of time after there's tragic events in the U.S., they will do, the little documentaries or different photojournalism. They will put the pictures of the victims and they
Mm-hmm.
will say,
Right.
so many people died. And I think that's a way of humanizing the situation for people to understand that when 10 people get killed, or 15 people get killed, or 20 people get killed, these people are real people. They're real human beings. And I think that for the most part, people in America will be outraged when they hear about somebody driving a car into a crowd and shooting people down. They
Sure.
will be outraged. But
Right.
I don't hear the same level of outrage about people being able to, it's like, oh yeah, we want to punish the guy who did this, but we don't really address the problem of the mental health problem, the fact that somebody is mentally ill and will get in a car and drive a car into a crowd and shoot at people. Like, those things keep happening in the US. Shootouts keep happening in schools, in hospitals, in movie theaters, on the street. Yet we're not making mental health a priority. We're not talking about how people are snapping left and right. People are losing their mind left and right. And we're not discussing this. We're not talking about it.
So, do you feel like I'll play devil's advocate here. Do you feel like that's part of our culture? Do you feel like that's part of our media? Do you feel like that's a political responsibility? Or is it part of our community to work together to understand or to be aware of each other's mental health level?
Well, first of all, I think there's a stigma around mental health. We are more likely to want to send somebody to the hospital if they are suffering from a physical illness. Some people don't believe in mental health. I remember working at a school, and there was a child that was deeply traumatized and he needed help. And I reached out to the family and said, "Would you like me to provide some therapy to your kid?" And they were like, "No, we don't believe in therapy."
Right.
So that there's that aspect. Then there is I don't think the government should have a mandate over the citizens about what they should or shouldn't be doing. Yet the government mandates a lot of things. Government mandates who can drive a car, who can do certain jobs, what kind of education you should have. There are types of laws for everything. So it would be far-fetched to expect people to demonstrate, to be sane, to have a gun, or to be sane to drive a car. Why would that be an invasion of somebody's privacy to demand of them to demonstrate that they are not going to go into a crowd of people and shoot at people? And so it's easier said than done. How do you enforce it? If somebody has a medical file demonstrating that they've been an antidepressant and that they've been like maybe struggling with
Mm-hmm.
OCD thoughts or whatever, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think giving them a gun is the smartest thing we can do as a society.
Right. Of course.
It's kind of like I think giving them counseling or access to counseling would be better. And then as a society, we provide people um, with different resources. There are tons of places you can go to get resources, but when it comes to mental health, I find it very difficult. I mean, I'm gonna put a plug in for chiropractors. I've been going to a chiropractor. I think going to a chiropractor is a wonderful thing. But then insurance companies, some of them don't want to pay for that because they don't see the value in it or they don't recognize the value in it. But the value in it is real, right? So I think that as a society, when people start demanding certain things, saying, "Hey, we need this. This is something we need to function to be." I don't want people to go in public places and kill people. That's not the way we should be operating as a society. And I feel that what can we do? I mean, do we start giving weapons to salespeople in stores and to bus drivers and school teachers to so they can defend themselves, or do we start addressing the fact that what's driving people to the place where they are committing crimes and sniping and losing their mind. Because I feel like we are neglecting one another to the point where some people are acting crazy. So, and it's not a nice term to use, but that's the reality. Somebody who's driving a car into a crowd and starts shooting at people is not well adjusted.
Yeah, I have a particular opinion about all of these things that are happening in the US sort of simultaneously, oddly enough. But in general, and subjectively speaking, if your family or your community is part of that actual incident, it certainly has a reverberating impact not only on the victims involved or the perpetrators involved, but it does on the entire community. And so perhaps the very simple thing is for us to just be more compassionate, more loving, more kind, perhaps more understanding, and perhaps less judgmental. But I know we love to judge. So, and easy for me to say all those things without being in any of these particular circumstances. There is a stigma around mental health and attention to mental health throughout the United States. That's obvious. I live in California, so things are a little bit more, woo woo, and we're a little bit more liberal about things like that. And I mean liberal in the sense that it's more acceptable, and it's not always easy to have access. It's not always easy to count on some sort of mental health support. And I certainly see a lack of mental health on the streets of Los Angeles. Trust me. But there are more programs probably available here than many other parts of the United States. Still, kind of in our smaller in our communities in general, it's just something that's like, oh, they're fine. They'll get over it. Or we don't have a, as humans, we don't reach out for help. I think that's also part of it, is that we don't have this sense of self-love or self sustainability that we reach out for help. Like, who's going to pick up that phone and say, listen, I really need to call. And I'm sorry, JP, I'm going to have to ask you to say the numbers for the suicide hotlines.
Well, there's a bunch of them, and I will list them at the end of the show. I'll put them on the.
Right. So we want to
That's
be
the
sure
easiest way.
people know that's available. You can pick up the phone and talk to people, and it's completely private and anonymous, and there may be other resources available through that, so that instead of blowing yourself up and a group of people, there may be an opportunity for some
They have
healing and understanding.
they have some hotlines that you can call, and then some of them that you can actually text to. So if you really don't want to be talking to somebody, you just want to text, you can do that as well.
Exactly. So I'm curious, JP, what are some of the issues you're hoping people will call in, since we're bringing, to light sort of these major issues and these critical issues, and you would like this to be a live call-in show where people could get help? What would
I would like to talk, for example, somebody lost their job and they need to discuss about the grieving process of losing a job, or somebody uh, needs to file disability and they need some information around, you know, what constitutes a disability, and maybe they've gone to see a doctor and they don't understand how to work. I mean, understand your rights, understand the particular situation you're in, and maybe you're struggling as a parent and you feel like you're the only parent in the world who's got those kind of issues. Or maybe you're in a relationship and its relationship is not going so great and you want to talk about it and you have no one to talk to. So call me and talk to me about it. I'll talk to you. And I feel like we live in a society where there's less and less access to communication. People don't communicate with each other. They don't look at each other. I was in LA about a month ago, and people don't look at each other. They don't talk to each
right?
other.
They don't. They
They
don't.
don't.
They avoid each other.
They don't make eye contact. They
No,
don't smile at each
that's
other.
weird. What do you want?
And so if you're around someone and you smile at them, they think you're a weirdo.
Right. Right. Where in other parts of the country, it's more common to say hello and how are you, and, all of
But
that
in big
sort of thing.
cities, most big cities, if you get around a big city, people now are very worried.
Right. And maybe, and probably justifiably speaking, perhaps, but yes, it's not as common to say hello and have a sense of safety. Certainly not on the West Coast in general right now. But it's interesting, and perhaps that's what your show will do, is to help bring a sense of comfort and a sense of community to people. And if this is going to be your Friday night call-in show, maybe people will be calling in on Friday night, because boy, by the end of the week, some of us are just spent, and it's a good place to ask for some guidance or some advice or some suggestions, and people can take it or leave it.
It might be Friday, might be Saturday, might be Sunday. I'm gonna put it at night though,
Yeah,
for sure.
For sure.
But I probably do it on the day where I don't work that much, so that way I'm not fried by the time people call in. Because I worked all day and I'm so exhausted. But the uh, the idea is really to establish, a community where
Mm-hmm.
people can actually support one another,
Right.
and uh, and I feel like there's definitely a need for that. There's not very many places you can go to talk to people. I mean, people use the church. A lot of people will join a church to feel a sense of connection, but sometimes it feels a bit disingenuous. You just really want to talk about your problem, and then you go to some place, and then you have to swallow, somebody's dogmas to be able to get somebody to listen to your problem, and then they might judge you for whatever you're expressing because you might not go with the lineups. Having a judgment-free, unconditional acceptance kind of a zone would be like pretty perfect.
Yeah,
And there
exactly.
are tons of, I think a lot of time what I'm running into with people is people will say stuff like, I have no one to talk to. I have no one to talk to. Or I don't want to burden my family, or I don't want to burden my friend, or I feel silly talking about that. That bothers me, but it shouldn't bother me. And the idea is that we should be able to rely on one another, not emotionally dump on each other, but we shouldn't have to be on the verge of a suicide to get somebody to pay attention to you. So,
Yes. So this is a safe space to come to. People can show up anonymously. You might hear their voice. People might be able to enter the chat, and the other aspect
comments.
of this is that you might be listening and find something really relatable. There might be a girl who's, trying to work her way out into her career, just finished college, doesn't know what direction to take, and there's the pressure of repaying $200,000 in loans, and yet you're not sure which direction to take, something like that. Whatever it might be, all of these issues are going to come up, and it's perfectly fine to be human. Perfectly
Or
fine.
even just basically get educated because there's so
Mm-hmm.
many TikToks and different Twitter's accounts which provide mental health advice, but sometimes some of it is doubtful.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's kind of people are voicing their own opinion. Everybody wants to be a coach, everybody wants to be a therapist, but not everybody goes to school to be one. And I was talking about that with someone yesterday, where they told me that they know someone who wants to do groups
Mm-hmm.
and charge money for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, is that person a licensed clinician? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, you can't really provide therapy without having a license. Well, he calls himself a coach. I'm like, really? So I feel like it's a dangerous zone where you start, charging money. If you want to get a group of people to talk to each other and to have a friendly support to each other, that's fine. But once you start making a business out of it, you're essentially providing a service that is therapeutic without having the therapeutic background. If that's really a calling for you, go to school, become a therapist. Just start having your own practice without having the background for it.
Right. So it's a good
Because
place
one
to use
thing,
discernment.
right, and also not just that, the uh, the state, you get lessons in a state. You have somebody overseeing you, so that means like whatever provide services you're providing, they make sure that you get the knowledge to provide it, but they also know that you understand the laws and that you're not gonna break laws. Whereas if you decide to just do a group and charge money for it, it's a free for all. It's kind of like the difference between having a contractor that's licensed and having somebody who says they're a contractor and they just come to your house and they take your money and don't do anything. That happens,
That
but
happens. There's
that
good
happens.
coaches out there. I will say there's good life coaches, good spiritual coaches out there.
Absolutely.
Just be aware of whatever it is you're getting yourself into. And the same with therapists. There's good and bad therapists. So, but it's always
But
good to kind of know somebody's background and if that resonates with you.
even the spiritual coaches, even the people that are spiritual coaches or that do some kind of coaching, a lot of them they get certified or they go to a course, or it's not just one day they woke up and say, "Oh, but I'm gonna be a coach then."
That's
It's
very
like
true.
it's like
Done
I'm
a lot
gonna
of education.
yeah, I'm gonna start providing mental health therapy. It's like, oh, yesterday I was a carpenter, but today I'm gonna be a coach. Why not?
So I'm going to throw something out to you. I'm curious what are the top three problems that your clients come to you for right now? And I feel like now might be different than 6 months ago, and I could be wrong.
Well, 6 months ago there was a lot more anxiety before the elections. And that anxiety for some people turn into depression.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Anxiety is really common for everybody. Why does anxiety lead to depression?
First of all, anxiety is kind of like your alarm system, your natural alarm system. So when you feel anxious, sometimes it's to protect you. So if you're in a situation where there's a potential danger, you might feel anxious. But in that, it's almost like your autonomic system saying, "Hey, pay attention to what's going on here. You might be in danger." It becomes problematic when you start being anxious all the time for no reason, and there's no danger, right? There's no threat, right? Because your limbic system, your reptilian brain, a long, long time ago, you slept with one eye open, one eye closed. You snored loud so animals would not come and eat you during your sleep. And if you're here today, it's because your ancestors survived whatever was a threat to them. Now, if you are anticipatory anxiety, you're afraid of something happening, you might feel very anxious. So for some people, they had anxiety around the election. They were having anxiety around the candidate. How it turns to, when you have a lot of energy, mental energy, you feel very anxious. When your energy goes low and you don't have a lot of energy, that anxiety can transform into depression because you no longer have the fight within you. You no longer have the will to fight, to get up, to get out of bed, to deal with things. So if something that you were afraid of happens, then you might surrender. And sometimes it can be that depression can come on because of a seasonal affect disorder, maybe not enough light. It could be a depression or anxiety can be a symptom of another disorder, or they can be the disorder themselves. So you could have general anxiety disorder, or you could have a major depressive disorder, or you could be suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then you might be anxious and you might get depressed. So in some cases it's the diagnosis, in some cases it's a symptom. But overall, sometimes people have both. They feel anxious and they feel depressed, but they don't feel anxious and depressed at the same time. They might feel very anxious when they're hyped up and they have energy, and then they feel depressed when their energy goes down and they no longer have the will to fight or the energy to fight, or they want to give up. Some people might get depressed following drinking alcohol because alcohol is a depressant, or smoking weed. Some people might get hyped up when they take an amphetamine and they get all high, and some people might feel, some people are dopamine chasers. They'll do everything to get dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. They'll go running, they'll go to club, they'll hang out with people, they have sex with strangers. They'll do anything they can do to get
Get that
that
high.
feeling, right? They'll go spend money they don't have. But then that dopamine gets harder and harder to get, and then they end up crashing. When they crash, they feel depressed. So, for example, somebody who is constantly thrill seeking, get onto motorcycles and go on motorcycles and go fast, 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 is going to have to do it more and more to get that feeling. And then when it stops, then they crash, they feel depressed.
Right. Exactly. It's a kind of addiction.
It is an addiction. A lot of addiction is actually based on people trying to self-regulate their brain through increasing the dopamine or the endorphin or whatever. And what happens is that their brain becomes more and more addicted to itself. So some people are, for example, they love chaos because when they are in crisis, their brain floods them with neurotransmitters that make them feel high. And then when they're calm, they get anxious. And so they create drama. So it's like a vicious cycle. Your brain is a pharmacy. You can actually pump into yourself a lot of stuff. But the thing is, what people don't seem to be aware of is there's a finite amount of neurotransmitters. That means somebody who's constantly thrill seeking is going to require more and more and more thrills to get to achieve the same results. And that can lead from being somebody who is edgy and anxious to one day getting to a place where you're just chronically depressed because nothing gives you a high and nothing gets a rise out of you.
Right. Okay. So that's depression and anxiety. We'll say those are the top two competing problems. What's your number three-ish?
Being overwhelmed by many different factors at once, financial stress, love, aging, the news and the news cycles and the doom and gloom culture. We live in a doom and gloom culture, so people are bombarded with negativity.
Okay. Interesting. That's a whole cluster. That's
Yes,
a
it's not
whole
one
cluster
thing.
of stuff.
So let's say somebody loses their job and then they lose their insurance and they lose also their place to live. Maslow hierarchy of need, right? You can't really function as a citizen of society if you don't have your basic safety, food, shelter met. Once you have that met, then maybe you want relationship and you want to have a sense of belonging. But because they build upon each other, you can't really address feeling important in society or having a sense of purpose before you actually met your shelter, safety, and food and water. So the whole idea of problems, there are some problems that are, I feel like right now what I'm dealing with a lot, coming more and more. People having existential crisis, and people of
Say
all
that
ages.
again. I know what an
Existential.
existential crisis is. I was a
Yeah,
philosophy
well,
major. Minor, excuse me. Explain that because I think that's something people aren't aware of. I certainly see it on the Soul Fan podcast because that's part of what we deal with, especially with our experts who have that experience with their clients. But tell me from your point of view what that existential crisis really is coming to right now.
let's pretend that you have a year. You use a person's lifetime and you block it like 4 seasons. You've got your spring, your summer, your fall, and your winter. Every time you go from one season to the next, you have a transition. Every time you experience a transition, you experience trauma. It's traumatic to change. Change is traumatic by essence. Stagnation is traumatic, but change is even more traumatic. So, for example, one of the most major changes that happen in the life of someone is being a teenager. That's when your body, you metamorphose, you grow, your body, you become a sexual being, you're going through adulthood. You go from being a child to being an adult. And that period of transition is very difficult. So teenagers, a lot of times, are struggling. They feel that they don't belong to one place, they don't belong to the other. Then you have quarter life crisis. You're a young adult, and you're no longer a child, and you feel like an adult, but not quite established. And maybe you've gone to school, you got a degree, but now you don't know what you're going to do with it. And you may not have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you want to find. So you may experience another transition, another existential crisis. And then there are people who have been married for 20, 30 years, or they've had the same job for 20, 30 years. And one day they wake up and they realize they don't want to be married anymore. They don't want to be working with their partner. And they want to throw everything they've ever worked toward, all the goals that they've ever established, they want to change that. And they think, oh, you know what, I'm unhappy because of house. I'm unhappy because of my job. I'm unhappy because of my children. I'm unhappy because where I live. I'm unhappy because of this. I'm unhappy because of that. And then finally, you've got people when they age, when they retire, and when they become older and their friends are dying and they know that the next stage in their life is aging and dying and they don't want to deal with that and they might get very depressed. I think one of the highest group of people that commit suicide in the United States are single white uh, male, like Caucasian male.
Mm-hmm.
Are more like it's a strong group of people committing suicide. They feel you go from a place where you may be a captain of industry or you might have a job and you may be married and you feel young and you feel great and then you get to be 60, 70 years old and suddenly you have maybe your wife has died or you're alone and single and you don't have a job and you don't have the same. And how do you exist? I feel like we place a lot of value on how other people perceive us in our society. And so let's be honest, we love the youth in America and the wealthy, but we don't really have a lot of respect for the young or the old or the people who are aging. We don't have a whole lot of respect for that. So even though our Congress is average age is 60 years old, because some people are 80 years old and they're holding on power like it's going
Right.
out of business, out of style. But we don't have really much room for all the people. That's why we put them away in in homes
Right.
and we don't. There's no inclusion like a lot of cultures. Grandparents will live with the children in
Right.
America. We don't. They go live in a home
Right.
and there's studies that shows that. Maintaining a relationship with somebody of a certain age, you extend their life because you give them a sense of purpose and they feel like they belong and they're important.
Right.
When you dismiss your mother or your father into a home, you basically, they don't have Alzheimer, you're contributing to their aging, premature aging.
Right. Yeah, that multi-generational sort of thing is important as a family and even as a community. I mean, there's other cultures where every generation is present at a party or everybody's out on a Saturday night and it's every generation that's out or, everybody who's coming to dinner is, not from a specific age group or a specific background. So it's just perhaps being more inclusive of everyone and might not hurt.
Even the denial that we live in such a denial. We act as if we're never going to die.
Mm.
There's death is all around us, but we act as if it's never going to hit us, that we're never going to be it. I was reading a book once about Mayan culture, and they said that they used to bury the dead inside of their home. So they would be at the bottom of the house in the earth, they would bury their dead, and then they'd live above it. So their people, their ancestors were always with them. I thought it was interesting.
It is interesting. It's very interesting. I've spent a lot of time in Guatemala, so I'm sure I've been in some locations where I've probably
Not
walked
anymore.
on some ancestors or some.
Yeah, but we
It's
don't do that
interesting.
anymore. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, legally speaking, we would have a few.
Not in the U.S.
Yeah, but
You know,
listen, I know some people who wouldn't mind being buried on their own land, so it makes sense.
they used to do that before. A lot of old homes
Mm-hmm.
will have their own cemeteries, right?
Mm-hmm.
People would bury their dead on the farms or whatever.
Yeah,
It used to be.
exactly.
Now you cannot do that anymore, but
No.
you used to be able to do that.
Interesting. I actually visited my family's cemetery when I was home in Iowa a couple of weeks ago, and my family's buried directly across from the original home that they homesteaded at back in the 1800s. So for a while, great great grandpa and grandma were right there next to the house. So, but it's interesting. It's just, and it's still next to our farm actually. Our
Well, what's interesting is when they decide to build because land is a very precious commodity in the US, and sometimes they'll build homes or a bunch of homes in an area where they were older homes, and they will not move the bodies.
Mm.
Like they forget to move the bodies, or they build. No, I am not.
No, I know you're telling the truth.
And I've read stories about places where they literally do not. They haven't,
They haven't
and we talk
excavated
about
the
spiritual.
bodies. No, and
They
even
have
in
not.
Malibu, that's true. Also, there's several Chumash native tribes that were buried on these.
Well, in the East Bay, in Oakland, there's a place by
Mm.
Emeryville. It's called Shell Mound.
Mm-hmm.
It's where a lot of Native Americans they build a shopping center above it. They built a shopping center above Indian burials, and then you've got all the spiritual, like people saying, "Oh, you get the people coming in and the spirituality and all that." And I'm saying America is a very haunted country. For being a young country, it's very haunted. And so you're like talking to people about, you know, uh, some people, it's neither here nor there. You either believe in an afterlife or you don't believe in an afterlife. You either believe in ghosts, you don't believe in ghosts. It's not debatable. It's not about who's right, who's not right. But there's a lot of people reporting really weird stories about what they've witnessed or experienced.
Back
I can't
back to
imagine.
honoring our older generations and
Right,
death itself, and
right,
accepting death as part of life, and life is that it's all interchangeable.
right. Well, the thought that I had going through my head was if you act as if you're never going to die and you don't remember you're dead, that means that you're living this life, which is, a temporary life, but you act as if it's going to be forever without, even though it might be just one plane and there's something else after it. But the denying yourself, and I think that's why a lot of people aren't really better. It's like they act as if this is all there is, and they don't have a moral code, or their code is kind of not aligned. And that's why, I think the one thing we should do for one another while we're on this plane, on this planet, is to be nice to one another and to be loving toward one another. Give love and receive love. That's what gives meaning to life, right?
Right.
But I feel that that's not a concept that goes. I feel like the concept of loving one another and to be loved by one another, that's kind of a hard concept for a lot of people to understand. That's why there are so many shows and so much violence around us, because we are disconnected from ourselves and from one another, and that's what creates mental illness is really a byproduct of a sense of disconnection.
Hmm.
When you're broken down and you're disconnected and you don't feel a connection, and when it creates mental, of course, sometimes it can be physiological, but I feel like when you burn down, when you have a burnout, when you are depressed, when you're anxious, when you experience you're not aligned with yourself, when you're not living in accordance, when you're not congruent, when you're not authentic, that can lead to mental health problems.
Right. That disconnection from self and from spirit and from
You
one
could be the
another.
nicest, yeah, you could be the nicest person in the world, but if you're living with somebody who puts you down every day of your life, words are like daggers. They can really kill you.
It's true. So, what's your hope for your show, for this live show?
I hope people are going to call in, they're going to talk about whatever's bothering them, and they're going to feel lighter afterwards, and they're going to go into the world and pay it forward.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I think that's going to happen, JP.
I'm excited about it. And if I can make it a place where people can connect and be good to one another, all the better.
That will happen.
So I will put the information for the suicide hotline in the chat, and then I will schedule, a podcast. I will figure this out. I'm gonna have to become better at this. This is not innate for me. This is kind of hard, but I will make that happen.
Yeah,
And the
mastering
next
the
time I
live
do it,
event is always a
well, I wanted
challenge.
to do it. I wanted to do it out of my office, but my office here right now, for whatever reason, it's brand new, but it's not working. And I'm like, so I've got to create myself a space where I can make that happen.
It looks great. You look great. It all looks perfect.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and for being such a great co-host for my first podcast. And I wish you a wonderful, wonderful evening and a happy New Year 2025.
Happy New Year 2025.
Thank you.